Over the past month, the coronavirus and emergency measures have led to a surge in unemployment. In the months ahead, that will mean large amounts of personal hardship, but also a huge drop in tax revenue, especially for the states. That's why the main reason is a new report from the Pioneer Institute that calls for more help from Washington. Our guest is one of the report's co-authors, a senior fellow at the Institute, Charlie Chieppo. Thank you very much for being with us, Charlie.
Good to be with you, Chris. Thanks.
So I want to talk about the main benchmark a lot of us use for measuring what's happening right now, even if it's before our time, and that's what happened in the Great Depression. Is this worse or maybe almost as bad as that?
Well, again, I think that depends on how you define worse. I mean, I think there is a very good chance that Massachusetts will top the record set during the Great Depression of 24.9% unemployment. But the bright side, if there is a bright side of that, is, in the Great Depression, it took 14 years for the unemployment rate to return to what it was pre-depression, and I certainly don't think it will take that amount of time here. So I think it will be severe. Extremely severe, but hopefully not nearly as long lasting as what our parents and grandparents saw during the Great Depression.
Well, this is also going to be more abrupt, even if it doesn't last as long. And what's the figure you're going by from The Economist at the
Yeah, it's really remarkable. We're predicting by June the unemployment rate would rise by more than it rose in the first 4 years of the Great Depression, and that rise would essentially have occurred over a 2-month period, 2.5-month period.
Of course, one of the other factors here, a lot of us watch the briefings on TV, so we're used to seeing the president and Nancy Pelosi, and we say, well, the government can just print money, the federal government, but what about the states?
Well, the states are really in trouble. Unlike the federal government, most states are required to balance their budget every year. So, the CARES Act, this sort of bailout act that was passed a couple of weeks ago, will provide the states with about $150 billion. Massachusetts is on tap to get just under $2.7 billion of that. And that certainly helps. But look, just on Friday, a new report came out from another national think tank saying that another $500 billion will be needed to actually cover the state's needs in this crisis. So I would say, this is problematic. And like the scold in me would also add that during good times, we're supposed to chip away at the budget deficit, and instead, in the years, the 3 years or so before this happened, it is expanded dramatically. So we don't want to be in a situation like Italy and Spain, where something like this hits and they don't have the resources to really fight it at the federal level. So I think going forward, it's time for us to start thinking about balanced budgets and prudent fiscal management again.
Well, aside from healthcare, the most pressing thing that the states need money for right now is unemployment insurance. How do we look for that in Massachusetts?
Well, Massachusetts, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that Massachusetts has one of the lowest funded unemployment insurance trust funds in the country. We started out with about 1.63 billion. That's already down to about 1.4 billion. Our calculations show that will be exhausted somewhere in between less than 2 months from now and at the longest 3 months from now. The better news is that the state in the last couple of years has been very good about increasing the amount of money in the rainy day fund. So there is well over $3 billion there. But really, I think the most important news there is that one of the provisions in the CARE Act is interest-free loans to states to bolster their unemployment insurance fund. So, I mean, again, ultimately they will have to get paid back, but they are interest-free loans um, that can help, in the midst of the crisis.
Now, I think a lot of us knew when this started that there would be many people who work for a living and who were suddenly unemployed, who were not eligible for unemployment. But I was surprised to see how few people were eligible.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Up until now, and I was surprised at this too, to be honest with you. And I'm self-employed, so I'm one of those people who wouldn't apply. So I did notice that. Um, but yeah, I mean, 57%, only 57% of people who become employed in Massachusetts under the state law would qualify for unemployment, and that I don't think is unusual among the states. Now, again, what the CARES Act has done is for this year anyway, change that and make it so that those who were self-employed, those who were independent contractors, making all those folks eligible. So they're making them eligible and adding an extra $600 a week to every unemployment check. So in the short term, we'll be able to address that. But you're right. I was very surprised at the number of people who become unemployed who do not qualify for unemployment insurance.
Well, when so many people out of work, that's bound to be trouble for the income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, and even if we have the best possible and the quickest possible recovery, I can imagine a lot of sectors, they're going to be in low gear for a long time. So what do you think that's going to mean for state revenue?
Well, in terms of state revenue, and you're right, I think a lot of sectors are going to be in low gear for a long time. And one thing that I would point out that's just important to so many of us is our local restaurants and bars where we love to hang out. Boy, a lot of those places don't have much of a cushion, and they're operating on low margins, and it's very sad. But a lot of them, I think, are not going to come back. So, but yeah, in terms of state revenue, I would say this: our research shows that income tax revenue will be more affected than sales tax revenue will. But to give you an example, in the Great Recession, earlier, of just over a decade ago, the unemployment rate went from 4.6 to 8.3. And from that, we saw a $2.4 billion drop in income tax revenue. This time around, we're projecting that the unemployment rate is going to go from 2.5 to somewhere around 25%. Now, again, hopefully it will certainly not be long lasting at that rate, but nonetheless, if an increase of less than 4% in the unemployment rate led to a $2.4 billion decline in income tax rate, we're talking about a big number going from 2.5 to around 25%.
So what's the best thing that the states can be doing about that right now?
Well, I'm not normally in the business of saying this, but I don't know. This is a tidal wave that is really beyond what I think states can handle. And I think that we are in a situation now where it is going to take federal action to deal with this. Now, certainly, as is always the case, more than ever now, sound fiscal management is going to be required. Much of the money that we get from the feds will be money will be in grant form, but some of this money, like the loans to bolster the UI trust funds, are going to be money that we have to pay back. So, I'm sure there will be some cuts that'll be required and some lean times for the state budget, but this one will certainly require action. Will certainly require federal action.
Now, of course, I keep thinking of the past examples. In the 1930s, we had these public works programs. When Obama was president during that downturn, there's a lot of talk about money for infrastructure stimulus. Is that the kind of thing we should be thinking of now as far as block grants from Washington?
Yeah, I think we do need block grants from Washington. And I think that every state, every state's going to have different needs, and I think that that's really, you mentioned before, what can the state do? I think that's going to be the most important thing the state can do, is to make wise use of that money. I think we learned a lot of lessons from the 2009 bailout. If you were during the Great Recession, if you remember, there was all that talk about shovel-ready projects, and we kind of discovered that shovel-ready projects were something of an elusive thing. And so I think the other thing that we learned, and we're seeing that now, is that in a situation like this, we're better served for the federal government to kind of go big and to help the states, because in the long term it will shorten the the length of the downturn, and ultimately end up costing less, and most importantly, limit the severe kind of pain that so many people are going to feel in this.
Charlie, one of the things that I certainly remember, I think you've seen a couple of downturns. Maybe I've seen a couple more than you. And
I've seen my share. I've been up there.
when it comes to state budgets, it always trickles down to less money for healthcare spending. Some things are not going to be available, maybe less money for public school systems, and even charter
Less
schools.
money for higher ed.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to be in for another round of that? Maybe a bigger round?
Yeah, I would say this. I think it is going to be difficult to avoid that. You have the House and Senate now about to unveil their budget plans, and I don't envy them. Having to suddenly face a situation in which all of the assumptions by which they were probably putting their budgets together have now been completely turned upside down. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to see some painful cuts. The only good thing is that we can certainly hope that this will certainly be severe. We hope that it will not be very long lasting.
I want to ask you about the MBTA, and I know that's not what you covered in this report, but you've been tracking the T for many years.
Oh, he's thinking about the MBTA.
My worst case scenario is that we end up with a bunch of new trains that never break down, but which nobody wants to ride. How far are we going to get to that possibility?
Well, are you saying in terms of because of the
we have this residual fear of.
Yes, yeah. Look, I think that I haven't thought a lot about that yet, because I probably have not thought enough about coming out the other side yet at this point. But that certainly is a fear. We're certainly hearing a lot about that in the hospitality industry, when we talk about people having a residual fear about staying in hotels and things like that. So I think that certainly is a possibility. I think that one thing that may help with that is the likelihood that this will be a staged recovery. And it's not like, on Friday, nobody will be on the T, and then on Monday morning when it's time to go to work, suddenly, the switch will have been flipped and everybody's going to be out there again. So that is certainly a concern. I think the T is going to have to do what a lot of places are doing, and go through and do this, really intensive cleaning of all their assets and that kind of thing. But I think that given that it's likely to come back online gradually, and the level of desperation people are going to have, I think, to return to something that approaches normal, I think that that's a problem, but I think it's a manageable problem.
Chris, one other possible silver lining here, with so many people working remotely, do you see some possibilities with that?
Absolutely. I do not bill myself as a futurist by any stretch, but I do think that clearly, that one of the lessons from this is going to be that, hey, for a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals, is that, hey, this working remotely is doable. For a lot of us, not for everybody, certainly. And that, not to say that everyone will do it all the time, but I think that you'll see more of it. It will certainly become much more a part of the culture. And I did see something just recently saying that on average, the average employer saves 20% by having employees work remotely, which was a really surprising figure to me.